Hello, everyone. I guess I'll start this out now. We're trying out a new webinar system today, so folks might take a little bit longer to tune in. But we will start out just with a little bit of news from CSIN and a background on our presenters. And hopefully by the time we're done with that, everyone will have managed to join us. I'll start out actually just by asking everyone to mute their lines so we don't get too much background noise. And then I'll welcome you to the 43rd Canadian Sustainability Indicators Network Learning Event webinar. My name is Carla Zubricki, and I am the CSIN coordinator and a project manager with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. Please note that today's presentation will be recorded and made available to CSIN members along with any related presentation materials. And I'll also try and email some presentation materials to you afterwards. We are very excited to welcome a diverse crowd of participants today and our gracious presenters, Dimple Roy and Livia Bizikova. Today, they will be presenting on adaptive policies and indicators. This learning event is scheduled to run from 12 p.m. Central Standard Time until 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. The presentation will take approximately 20 minutes, after which time we will open up to questions and discussion. I'd like to ask you to hold any questions until after the presentation, please. If you do have a question or comment, and we are definitely eager to receive them, please try typing it into the chat box, and I will demonstrate here. So I am going to type a message to everyone in the chat box, and make sure you select everyone rather than one particular person. So I'm typing in type questions here. We can try having people patch in using audio, but in our experience, it doesn't always work. That sometimes requires a bit of troubleshooting. So I'd be happy just to relay the questions to our presenters. Also, if you have a microphone, I'd ask that you please mute it now so that we can minimize background noise. And if you don't know how to mute the microphone on your computer, that's okay too. I can actually do so on my end with webinar controls. And just if you do want to say something, just send me a chat message and I will keep an eye on that. So to start things off, I'll tell you a little bit about our presenters. Dimple Roy is the director of the Natural and Social Capital Program at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, also known as IISD. Her work is focused on the areas of integrated water resources management, watershed governance, adaptive policymaking, sustainable agriculture, and community-based adaptation in the Canadian prairies, among other things. In addition, she works in partnership with provincial and federal agencies to develop programs and delivery mechanisms in water and agricultural management. Dr. Livia Bizikova is a member of IISD's Foresight Group with experience in the fields of sustainable development, scenario development, participatory planning, and integrated assessment. She works with diverse stakeholders, including decision makers at various levels, UN agencies, and partners in various countries, including Canada, Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, Mozambique, Tajikistan, China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And I believe there are several more when I think of the projects I know that Livia has been involved in recently. And with that, I'd like to pass the controls over to Dimple, who is going to start us off by sharing a bit about adaptive policies. So just let me do that here. And Dimple, I will, or if you want to unmute yourself, actually, there, I've unmuted you. And share your screen?
Sure. Guess I need to. There. Is that visible to everyone, the first slide? Carla?
Sure. Yeah, yes, it is.
Okay, great.
Dimple.
Thank you, Carla. As Carla mentioned, the two of us, Livia and myself, will be presenting today on adaptive policy making the ADAPT tool, what it means, and then some aspects of measuring policy adaptation and policy adaptiveness. So we'll go into this in some detail over the next 20 minutes. Just to give you a sense of how we're going to be presenting, this is a brief outline. I will go through the first few items on this outline. I will be talking about adaptive policy making, what it means, why we talk about it. Then I'll talk a little bit about the ADAPT tool, a tool that we've developed to operationalize the key elements of adaptive policy making. And I'll talk very briefly about some recent ADAPT tool applications that we've done in Canada. And then I'll pass it on to my colleague, Livia Bizikova, who will be talking more about how we're now adapting the ADAPT tool to look at measuring policy contributions to adaptation needs, as well as how policies are being adaptive. So some of these measures that we've been looking at and developing. So the adaptive policy making work has been going on at IISD for quite a few years now. I've been involved in it for the last 7 or 8 myself. And we originally started working on it because we knew that policies often fail when they encounter uncertainty. So often policies are designed with a fairly narrow scope, and if they encounter something that's outside of their scope, they have a tendency to fail. So we looked at long-standing policies that had either performed really well or conversely had failed over time in India and in Canada, and we extracted from this research, we extracted some key elements of these policies that help them be flexible in light of uncertainty, as well as kind of used as cautionary tales, the ones that failed when they encountered uncertainty. So adaptive policy making talks about policies that can perform effectively in light of uncertainty. When we did our research, we actually realized that when we talk about uncertainty, there are 2 kinds of uncertainties. One is the known unknowns, the stuff that is uncertain, but we have an idea of the fact that it's going to happen. So temperature changes, sea level changes, we know that these are changing with climate change. The uncertainty is in their magnitude, but we do know that these are happening. And then the other part of uncertainty is the stuff that we don't know about. That's the stuff that comes out of left field and takes us by surprise. So to respond to these 2 types of uncertainties, we kind of categorized them specifically and talked about the anticipated uncertainties and the unanticipated uncertainties. And then to respond to them, we talk about elements of adaptive policies that are meant for planned adaptability, the key elements that can help you deal with the stuff that you can foresee. And then the autonomous adaptability are the tools of policies that really help you deal with the things that you cannot foresee. And these are often kind of the key elements of adaptive policies for times such as this, where we're encountering economic uncertainty, climate uncertainty, demographic uncertainty, kinds of uncertainties that we haven't even really thought about yet. So the ADAPT tool, once we did this research, we published a book in 2009 and kind of talked about those 7 elements of adaptive policymaking that I just talked about. I'll actually go back and talk about them very briefly. We talked about 7 key elements of adaptive policymaking. The first one, integrated and forward-looking analysis, is simply knowing as much as you can about your future. So using careful analysis, deliberation on trends, using future scenarios, and taking a good look at what the future holds for the policy, what is the context that the policy is going to encounter, and have a really good understanding through both analytical and deliberative methods. Built-in policy adjustment processes are simply building into the policy where applicable, building in adjustment triggers. So for example, a dam that's built with a safety valve in case when and if the water level rises beyond a certain level. Or we found this was used in things like weather indexed insurance policies, where if you have, say, temperature rise over a certain temperature for a certain number of days, the insurance policy kicks in because it's a given that the crops have failed. Formal review processes are regularized, deliberate processes that that review the policy. So they're, as opposed to ad hoc review processes, which happen usually when a policy is failing, we actually propose that all policies have regularized, formalized review processes that again use both analytical and deliberative methods for policy review. Multi-stakeholder deliberation is to ensure it's to go beyond consultation and really bring in the perspectives of a variety of stakeholders. Promoting variation is using a variety of instruments to achieve the policy goal. So a careful articulation of the policy goal and then using a variety of instruments to ensure that you're hitting all the different triggers and having resonance with the different stakeholders. Enabling self-organization was one of the less tangible tools that we found, but we did find that instead of creating organizations, if you can identify the existing social capital that exists in a particular policy context and enhance that. So provide resources, provide leadership, provide a forum for sharing of ideas. These are the kinds of things that really help self-organization, the ability of players to organize around an issue or a topic, and these are often the institutions that really help, for example, in times of disaster relief. And then finally, decentralization is to ensure that the policy is actually being implemented at the lowest appropriate level, and appropriate is a key word here. It could be local in the case of watershed management, but it could be federal or central in the case of defense, for example. So ensuring that the right policy implementation scale is chosen. So to operationalize these key elements of adaptive policymaking, we developed something called the ADAPTool, or the Adaptive Design and Assessment Policy Tool. And this was partly due to a need from our policy partners, because they asked us, how can we actually start to assess the policies that we have, as well as start to build in some of these elements into policies that we're designing. So this tool is intended to help with that. And it does two things, essentially. It asks if existing policies are supporting anticipated adaptation needs. And it usually is in the context of climate adaptation, although we have used it on occasion to look at stressors such as economic change. And then the second question we ask is, are the policies adaptive in and of themselves? And this is where we go through kind of those 7 key elements of adaptive policymaking and look at how policies are faring vis-a-vis those elements. This is what the ADAPTool looks like. We have a front end on our website. So this allows you to go in and put in some initial information, such as the geographic scope of the analysis, the key stressor, the names of the programs that are being analyzed. And then if you hit the Generate Spreadsheet button, it gives you an Excel-based spreadsheet that is actually easier for folks to shop around and then work collaboratively with some of their policy partners on this analysis. So we did find that this kind of dual version works quite well. This is what the Excel sheet ends up looking like. It's essentially a 4-worksheet toolkit. There's an About the Tool tab at the beginning. The second sheet is just describing the scope of the analysis. The third worksheet we talk about, we identify key sectors that the policy is going to impact, and then go through a bit of a brainstorming and analytical process to look at the ways in which this sector is going to be vulnerable to the key stressor that's been identified, and then adaptation actions that need to be taken to combat those vulnerabilities. The third sheet talks about policy adaptive capacity analysis, and which is where we go through some of those key elements of adaptive policymaking. And then finally, a synthesis sheet puts all this information together, both from a qualitative and a quantitative standpoint. I won't go into this in much detail. This is essentially what some of the questions look like. So the first question is around the vulnerability and the adaptations, anticipated adaptation actions supported by the policy, and then we go through, as I said, questions that ask about how those elements of adaptive policymaking have been incorporated. Is decision making adequately decentralized? Does the policy have a regular formal review process, and so on? We do also have now an ADAPTool version for new policies where the questions are a little bit more exploratory. We talk about how could the policy be resilient to the stresses that have been identified? How can the policy enhance the capacity of relevant stakeholders? So it's a little bit more descriptive, and we don't do a quantitative analysis at the end of this. We just give a qualitative briefing note of sorts. So very quickly, we just finished a project in 4 provinces in Canada. We worked in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia, looked at policies, existing policies across a variety of sectors, as well as pilot tested the ADAPTool for new policies in Manitoba, looking at a new wetland policy. We roughly went through this process. So at the top, you'll see kind of the steps that we went through. We had a capacity building element in all of the provinces. We did some training workshops or worked one-on-one with some key leads on the provincial side. We identified the vulnerabilities and adaptation needs relevant to the key sectors. And then we did the kind of main policy assessments using the ADAPTool. And then we developed the report. In some cases, the province took the lead on that. In some cases, we took the lead, and we have some provincial reports available. This is what the assessment looked like. Roughly in one case, in BC, we did a suite of agricultural policies. The scoring is simple. We have a three-point scoring. So 0 or red is where the policy is not supporting. So in the case of the adaptation analysis, the policy is not supporting the adaptation action, and that would be a 0. Or in the case of the adaptive policy analysis, the policy does not incorporate whatever element we're talking about. Yellow or 1 is where it's somewhat supportive or somewhat applicable. And then green or 2 is where it's clearly supporting or is doing, it's doing a good job. And this is the synthesis sheet. So we have numbers other than 0, 1, and 2 where it's cumulative, but it gives kind of an overview of how the policies are doing. And the color coding helps identify the gaps and the strengths right away. This is what you often see in the synthesis sheet. It kind of plots where the policy is on the x-axis. We have the ability of the policy to respond to unanticipated events. So this is the autonomous adaptability. And on the y-axis, we have the ability of the policies to support anticipated adaptation, which is the planned adaptability. And obviously, we want all the policies to be in the top green corner, and the ones that are in the bottom in the red are the ones that have some gaps, and we've given some recommendations. So this sheet basically gives a snapshot of all, I believe it was 27 policies that we looked at in Canada, and we kind of gave this in our synthesis document. And as I mentioned, we have some provincial reports, and these are available on our website. I think that was my overview. I'm going to pass it on to Livia, who's going to talk a little bit about how she's been involved in taking this work further to develop some monitoring and indicator components. Livia, I think I have to pass it to you. But, oh, sorry, no, I'm not passing it to you.
Okay, I think you can just show the slides.
Hey, Livia, you're running it.
Yeah.
From Dimple's screen. Okay.
Yes. Sorry. So just let me know when you want to change.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so my name is Livia Bizikova, and I'm with IISD working on indicator scenarios and also this work on adaptive policies, integrated assessment. Thank you, Dimple and Carla, for introduction and for review of the ADAPTool. So one part, what kind of led to this application of with the ADAPTool is that as you go through the tool, you basically generate a large number of information about policy performance, about weaknesses in policy performance, about how the policies are being implemented, how participation is done, and many aspects. So we were interested in this project, which is an application in Central America, when we've been interested to measure the resilience of the food system in the context of climate change and other stresses. And we were really wondering about how to provide indicators for policymakers so that they actually collect data and measure the resilience of the food system. While there is a lot of information about food security and measuring food security in many of these countries, it's usually done more at the local level, at the household level, like household surveys or calorie intake, quality of the diet, health issues, but not much on the policy level. And very often, what is also important that these kind of surveys are fairly costly, and they are only done in few years time apart. While with the policy performance or looking at the outcomes of the policy assessment, there we were hoping that we can derive indicators that relate to the resilience of the food system, while they are also easier to collect. And in order to do that, so basically we took the ADAPTool that Dimple just presented, and we applied it in 3 countries, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala, but we modified it a little bit. Next slide, please. We modified it a little bit to basically speak directly to food security issues. So as you've seen from Dimple's presentation, the questions in ADAPTool are fairly generic. So you're looking at how the participation is occurring, how the regular reviews are completed, if the specific adaptations are supported. So because it was applied in these 3 countries where we issues of travel, and we can't being involved directly in the implementation of the tool as we did in the provincial work. So we adapted this tool and we inserted more language around food security so that the questions were more specific related to the aspects of policies in terms of their support for resilience and food security. But otherwise, it was the same ADAPTool. The other important part of it was also that, and this relates also to ADAPTool, that because it's a structured tool that is done in an Excel format, even if you do it in different places or in different countries, the outcomes are still comparable. And for us, that was also important that we can compare different types of indicators or outcomes across these 3 countries. Next slide, please. So now, in terms of the indicators, so our aim was here, as I stated before, to move further from the ADAPTool that provides a report, that provides an assessment of how the policies are supporting the known adaptation need or the potential future challenges, to actually have a set of indicators that are key from a resilience, from a food security resilience perspective, and they are related to the policies that are being, or programs that are being implemented. So basically, we derived kind of 3 sets of indicators from this application. So first set of indicators are those that are related to, basically we have in each level of the ADAPTool, we have a set of indicators. So those relate to supporting known adaptations, supporting adaptive capacity, or general supporting how the policies are implemented. The other thing also was important for us that these indicators sometimes are already defined within the policies themselves. But if we analyze, let's say, 5 policies using ADAPTool, then at the end we can kind of create a set of indicators that comes from these different policies, but they really speak to an issue that we analyze, which in our case was food security resilience or food system resilience. And this also means that because you work through many policies, you can actually end up with a large number of indicators. and therefore there is also the need to prioritize and between these indicators to create a core set of indicators. And we use basically participation with stakeholders and with communities to prioritize between the indicators. So now, next slide. So as I started talking, there are three kind of sources of indicators coming out from the ADAPTool based on its structure. So the first part is really related to actions that are when we are assessing if the policies are supporting specific adaptation actions. So here basically the policies are scored according to support or partial support or no support for these actions, and based on that we can either start looking at those trends that, let's say, that they lack. So we can start looking at indicators to improve the performance, or address the need if there is no support so far, or on the other hand, those issues around food security that were really selected, that were important in the policy perspective, and they even have high rating within the policies, then they could be turned into an indicator to be monitored and included. So what I'm trying to say is that we're not just selecting those areas where the policies are performing not well, but also indicators that are performing well. Policies that are performing well could be, become an indicator. In terms of the actual indicators, next slide, please. In terms of actual indicators, so these are basically some of the indicators that came up from the consultations using the tool. So they basically relate mostly around the programs that are linked to the policies, or how they implement it, so specific programs and projects that are linked to these policies and are relevant from the food security perspective, how they are implemented. There are also specific issues around allocation. So some of these policies are national level policies, and it's not only that matters that they implemented at the national level, but specific location if these policies are implemented in, let's say, drought-prone areas or areas affected by a landslide, so indicators related to those allocation of those activities, and also issues related to available budget and budget allocation. So very often when we do the assessment of the ADAPTool for these, for let's say different types of adaptation actions, what we can see is that, let's say, the policy itself supports the action. There is nothing against that action in the policy, but maybe there are no budgetary support, or there is not enough budgetary support to actually carry on that action. So that's why also here are indicators relating to allocated resources for the action. The second set, next slide. The second set is part of the tool that looks at adaptive capacities. So adaptive capacity, I think Dimple probably mentioned this briefly, is very important, and it has been in the literature for a while, looking at the capacities of people to address changes if they happen. So basically they're able to recognize that some action is needed and they have the capacities to do something. And it could relate, you can see it on the table, so it could relate to access to financial resources, technology, they have the skill or knowledge, they have relevant infrastructure, they have access to institutions, and also the distribution of the resources are equitable, so everybody could access them. And so many policies actually aim to improve adaptive capacities, and not at least some aspect of it, and especially in the food security or food resilience point of view, when we're talking about smallholders, so people that derive their livelihoods from a subsistence or mixture of subsistence and paid job. It's very important that they actually have access to services, they have the knowledge, they have access to financial resources and technology to act, to change their practices, to modify things when they happen. So, and there are policies that could, encourage or support some of the type of the adaptive capacities. So based on this, basically how the policies were evaluated, we created a set of indicators that aim for assessment of adaptive capacities. Next slide, please. So, and this is just a small snapshot. Also, they really relates to different types of capacities or different types of actions that, or skills or knowledge that people have to undertake to modify their practices or to modify their practices when we know that these activities are more resilient, or modify these practices, let's say when they see changes in the forecast or changes in terms of pest management, or in terms of the quality the quality of the agricultural soil, erosion, and things like that. So here the focus is really looking at if the farmers have the knowledge, if they apply these practices, and also if they have access to information. In many of these countries, here I think there's few more indications than I did not put there. It's also the issue of the access. So while in our countries, overall people can have access to information if they have internet or if they have certain telecommunication tool access. In many of these countries, a lot of the people who are poorer, who would actually need the support, they may not have access to these services. So while the policy provides access, it may not provide access to the group of people that it's mostly needed. So some of the indicators here also include those if people who are from disadvantaged groups actually can access some of this capacity, some of the services that the policies provide to improve capacity. Okay, next slide. And the last set of indicators are really related to more how the policies are designed, how they are reviewed, what is the participation in policy making, consultation processes. So these are really related to not exactly the outcomes that the policies provide, but more the process, how they are designed. And it was really interesting for us to see that even in communities where we were really looking at food security, food system resilience, there was equal number of issues suggested at the local level from the food utilization, but there was also an equal number of actions suggested exactly around how policies are designed and how they are, how the process of policy development is done. And so therefore here the indicators are really related to, and this is next slide, how basically the communication process, how the consultation process is done, how the communication is done, ability of the local government to act autonomously in emergencies, number of consultations, where there are vulnerable groups involved, also access to financial resources in terms of emergency response, and also involvement of vulnerable communities in plan development or resource allocation. So this really, and this was interesting for us to see also that that a lot of the indicators or the core issue around food and security were actually related to this kind of more institutional policy development processes, not just issues, on the ground in terms of production and consumption. Last slide. So going through these three aspects of the ADAPTool, we basically created three set of indicators. So the first one is rather focusing on projects and programs that are related to policies. Then we have part focusing on adaptive capacity, and then we have the third group, which is really focusing more about how the policies are made, how the policies are made, how the what are the decision-making processes that are used, who is included, who is not included or not consulted properly. So based on that, basically we compiled a set of indicators, and these indicators in our context are really used to monitor specific aspects of food system resilience. But they can also, because we focus on this issue, but they can also be used to feed into adaptation planning, because you are monitoring policies that provide contribution to adaptation, and thus they also provide interesting indicators for adaptation planning. And also most of these indicators, because they are linked to ongoing policy efforts, very often, especially from those first two groups, they are already collected somewhere, because many of these organizations at the local level that implement these policies, they collect at least some basic statistics. So then the outcomes really were not that much focusing on new indicators, but just taking those indicators that are available in the indicator set and just collecting them and putting in taking this new lens and looking at what are those indicators that are relevant from the food resilience perspective. The last set of indicators around participation, there wasn't much monitoring done that. Like there were some awareness about issues, but there was no systematic monitoring about, participation or involvement or how often the reviews are done. So those indicators were rather new for many of the stakeholders, and even though they were new, they are also they are not that intense, not that labor intensive to collect compared to some of food security indicators that really involve large number of household surveys and other type of this type of research. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Livia. That was really interesting. I actually didn't know all the details of that project, and I learned a fair bit myself, and it's great to see how we've applied some of this knowledge in Canada and then also in Central America. Now I'd like to invite everyone to type their questions into the chat box, and maybe first I'll have Dimple stop sharing her screen, and then I think I'm new to this webinar system, but it's quite intuitive. I'm pretty pleased with it. You should see a chat box to your right, I'm hoping. And if that doesn't work, you can instead try unmuting yourself. But let's try, if you have questions first, typing into the chat box. So I will demonstrate right now. Hi, please type your questions here. And yeah, we do have them coming in. From Susanna Bruno, is there opportunity to work with IISD on an adaptive drought policy in Alberta watershed? I guess that question would be for Dimple or Livia.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dimple, we can hear you wonderfully.
Thanks, Susanna. We would be happy to maybe get in touch with you and see what you have in mind. So yes, we have been working, as I said, we've been working across the country kind of opportunistically, and we do, the strength of the project is based on the interest from a provincial counterpart. So if there is interest from the province, we'd be happy to help. We have some tools, we have some expertise and some experience now working with this tool on water, agriculture, wastewater, protected areas, forestry, mining, a whole range of different sectors. So we'd be happy to help if we can.
And Susanna, I just put in Dimple's email address into the chat box. She had it up on the screen for a moment until I had to stop sharing it. So you can reach her at that email address, or you could always reach me as well, and we'd love to hear from anyone who's interested in learning some more. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, folks, think about that. I actually have a few thoughts myself. I was partially involved in the 2013 analysis that IISD did, and we had not brought it as much to the indicator level, but I'm looking forward at the work that we could do. And I'm wondering in which sector Livia or Dimple think that indicator thinking might be most beneficial, because we looked at mining, forestry, water, fisheries, agriculture, a wide range of things. And I know they were both well-versed in all of the different sectors. So I'm wondering if they have any reaction of where they think the indicator thinking would be a great fit.
Livia, do you want to?
Sure. I think probably from the adaptation needs point of view, I think it would be probably most relevant in a sector where there is the highest adaptation needs, or it's a sector that is in general most vulnerable to climate change. And it would be also good to think of sectors that, in the policies that we already assessed, to choose sectors that actually quite doing well in terms of monitoring their policy performance. because in that case, you really add only very few indicators. You rather regroup or select from the indicators that are monitored, that they used to monitor the policy anyway, but now you just select them from the adaptation perspective. While in sectors where there's not much monitoring, you have a policy that's not designed to address adaptation. You would like to monitor it from the adaptation point of view, but they don't have their own indicators. So it's much more work. That can only probably will be more kind of supported if you have an adaptation plan that already talks about this sector that, as a priority. So then you need to design indicators for that adaptation plan, and then you can start thinking about, in conjunction with those policies that support those actions in that adaptation plan, so how you design indicators that are relevant for that policy as well. So you're not designing two sets of indicators in parallel.
I think I would concur. I'd say that obviously we have been using the ADAPTool in many of the sectors that are most vulnerable, but I'd say my instinct would be to go with agriculture and with water management, because these are the ones we've applied the tool most to, and there seems to be a lot of interest from these two sectors to understand, increasingly understand how their policies are contributing to their adaptation needs, as well as how the policies are doing themselves, how flexible they are. And I think there's, we have been in parallel working on indicators for both agriculture and water sectors. So those seem like the kind of low-hanging fruit, and there's been a lot of interest from definitely the agricultural stakeholders here in Manitoba, in BC. We have some real champions, so I can see some great applications.
Yeah, Dimple, I could see that as well. I was looking at the examples that Livia had up on her slide, and for agriculture, and some of them were, I think, percentage of farmers using soil conservation, and one could fairly easily see some of these being transposed into Canada. We have another question from Shivanand, who's asking, can the ADAPTool be used to compare performance/monitoring across different geographic regions?
I'd say with caution. It's a fairly context-specific. I mean, the tool, the methodology is definitely comparable, and that's the beauty of it. And I think Livia alluded to the fact that it really allows you to compare across different geographies. And we have done a little bit of that. We have found, though, that it has a subjective element to it, and it is fairly context-specific. So it pulls together quite a bit of qualitative information, and if that information is different for two different regions, then you'll get slightly different snapshots of those two regions. But with those caveats, I'd say yes, if you can have, if you can minimize some of those elements, like have someone involved in both of the assessments so that you're reducing the subjectivity, make sure you have well-trained people applying the tool, so that there's a good understanding of how to score and why you'd give a 1 against a 2. You can have comparative, you can have comparable results across different geographies. Anyone else, Livia?
Yes, and we did, similarly to what we did in Canada. So we did capacity building sessions in each of the countries and together before they started applying it, so that there's at least some shared understanding exactly of those kind of soft issues, that what exactly is considers like a high support, what considers a medium or low support or more support. So we did that. And I think it's definitely can be used more. I wouldn't say comparing, but because then it kind of gets sensitive and of like, why this is doing so badly and this is doing so well. But I think even the assessment that we did with in Canada kind of showed that there's that it's rather diverse, and that there is many things that the policies or the policymakers can learn from each other, instead of really kind of just focusing on comparing one-to-one.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the lessons were around the process itself, around how, adaptation specialists talk with sector specialists, and get a better understanding of the synergies, and we also had some learning across the provinces, which was really nice because provinces learned from each other on what was working, what wasn't. So more than a comparable kind of quantitative comparability, it seemed more like a experience sharing and best practice translation type exercise.
Okay, thanks, guys. I invite anyone else to type in questions, and I actually have another one myself. Livia, as Livia was speaking, I was looking at her slides. I had a question in my mind that she answered moments after I had the thought, but so my question was how about prioritizing indicators, and she said it was done through participatory processes in the Central American work. So my question now is, do you see a similar way of prioritizing indicators happening were this to run in Canada? So how would we prioritize indicators in Canada if we have many to choose from? Would it be a participatory process? And if so, who would be involved in the participatory process?
So in Central America, basically we did first a series of community assessments, and then we did this work. So in the community assessment, we already had good understanding of what are the issues that matter for food system resilience. So we can use that information to guide the selection of the indicators. So we had some understanding on the ground of what is needed. And then we, looked at what the policies provide inputs, and then we had some stakeholder engagement in the final selection as well. I'm not sure. I think it's so the challenge there is that you can really end up with a large number of indicators. Like overall, I think we ended up, I would say, close to 60, 70 indicators, and that's a very large number of indicators, given that. It would require, if we would like to turn it into an effective monitoring system, it would require people to follow through. So we ended up then selecting them all, also grouping some that kind of are a little bit similar, and then sub-selecting issues. But so for the context, I think it's mostly relates to, I think it's mostly a participation of policymakers, and then also looking at, as I said before, if you have an adaptation strategy, to be able to speak to that as well, or using these indicators to provide multiple, to use them for multiple purposes. So this is not some sort of an artificially created set of indicators only for this purpose, because then it very likely won't be used. I'm not sure this doesn't answer your question that well.
No, it helps. Anything to add, Dimple, about your thoughts on this?
No, I think Livia has done a good job. I think I haven't really been engaged in that process of really picking indicators, but I can see that it would be a mix of bottom up inputs from the key stakeholders, as well as some of looking through the existing indicators and what makes sense. So that would be my instinct. But Livia has tested this out in a variety of contexts, so I think she has the wisdom on this.
Okay. Oh, and one more question or comment just came in, and it reads, one key issue related to measuring adaptation progress is the attribution of outcomes to specific policies or program/project interventions. As adaptation is in many cases built into existing interventions, how does the ADAPTool differentiate those outcomes?
I'm thinking about this. Go ahead, Livia.
Oh, absolutely. So, there is definitely a huge issue of attribution, but I think it's not just the issue of adaptation. Like, let's say when you look at issues around water quality, or changes in some of the other practices, you can also narrow down things related to specific contributions, specific impacts related to policies, human activities, or human activities induced by policies. And then you have many other things that come into the picture that you can't really measure or can't really attribute. So I think this is overall definitely a challenge. So that's why what we try to do is also use these indicators in terms of adaptive capacity, in terms of the policy process, or those on adaptation actions to basically just somewhat serve as proxies, so that there is a likelihood or the high likelihood that if the decision-making processes are, done in a way that there is consultation of vulnerable groups, they have access to services. If there is an effort on adaptive capacity to improve some of the skills or information that is relevant, and we're measuring this, then there is probably a higher likelihood that if, the adaptation needs occur, people will be able to act. But of course, it's not for sure, and we don't know until the adaptation need or some sort of disaster occurs and people need to react. So yes, I absolutely agree. But we just see these indicators more as a proxies, so that policymakers can start working with that. Because otherwise, lots of the measuring that's done in this context is really related to very community, household, low-scale actions or measurements around food security. And there is nothing, and then there is national indicators, but there is nothing really in between, and to indicate what kind of actions are being implemented, or how people are involved in decision making. So these are the kind of that set of indicators. This tries to cover that space in between. But I agree, it's hard.
Any thoughts, Dimple? Or
no, again, I think that Livia's got the indicator side of it well covered. I mean, I think that the way the ADAPT tool is designed is that, we do try and, it's a little bit prospective. We're looking at whether the policy is covering the adaptation needs and supporting them in any way. So it's a bit of an exploration that happens when we sit in a workshop and kind of go through that long list of required adaptation actions, say in the agricultural sector, and we kind of tease out, we have a policy document in front of us, and through conversations with the various stakeholders, we tease out how the policy is supporting adaptation. I suspect it's that kind of conversation that also happens on the indicator side. And attribution is definitely an issue. I mean, we face that in all sorts of our work where we're looking for clear causal links, and we can attribute change to specific actions or implementations that we've done. So I don't think that we've completely overcome that issue in any way, but we've definitely kept that in mind, and we always recommend a mix of analytical and deliberative processes to kind of get all those different perspectives and make sure that we cover some of the missing causal links.
Okay, definitely. Here's an interesting question. Are mitigation strategies considered a part of the adaptive policies process?
I'd say yes. I think that broadly speaking, if mitigation is preventing something from happening, then the tools that we talk about, such as formal review processes, so making sure that you have built-in review mechanisms, actually does help prevent an issue before it happens. That's the goal. So it does help with adaptation, but it also helps foresee and prevent certain policy-related disasters or issues. Obviously, we can't, we're dealing with the narrow space of policy design and policy implementation, but within that policy space, we definitely, the goal is to anticipate well before time what's going to happen, and we do that through the integrated assessment processes, the deliberative processes, the formal review mechanisms. All of those tools are actually designed to help foresee what's going to happen and, either deal with it well, which is the adaptation side, or to actually avoid it if possible. Livia?
Yes, so in the resilience side, we did not look at mitigation, partly because this was a subnational level issue, and also these countries really, they could have also, policies on reducing emissions, but it was not a priority. And working on through the resilience framework, and thinking of the food system, which is very complex, adding more elements to it, I think it would be just like we would be totally overwhelmed. But I think theoretically, I think ADAPTool could be designed or in a way, but it maybe requires some tweaks to look at if it supports mitigation actions. If you look at specific mitigation actions, that's easy. But when you're starting looking at if there's anything else that, kind of like mitigate your capacity. So we have the capacity that you need to support adaptation. But do you need capacity to support mitigation, and what it is, and have you?
Yeah, I think there's an analog for mitigation, but I do think that the tool covers some aspects of mitigation in a broad sense. I think that one simple possibility could be adding a mitigation sheet, identifying key mitigation actions, and then seeing if the policy is supporting those mitigation actions. So that kind of add-on is something that one could think of. But that second half, like Livia said, I think we'd have to do a little bit more digging around what are the key elements of mitigative capacity. And then I don't think that our research has been focused as much on mitigation. So some of the key elements of adaptive policymaking may not be as applicable.
Okay, thanks guys. And we're now closing in on 1 o'clock. So I think we're gonna wrap it up. I will be posting a recording of this learning event on the CSUN website, and I'm also going to email some applicable resources to you guys, including some of the reports that were produced in 2013 that Dimple spoke about. And also, Livia, is there any kind of a policy brief or report that's going to come out of your work in Central America that I'd be able to share at some point with CSUN members? I don't think it would be ready quite yet, but...
Yes, so we have 2 draft policy briefs that are just to be finalized in the next few weeks.
Okay.
So they definitely need to be done before end of April.
Okay, and then folks can look out for that in their mailboxes as well, because I will email that to you once I have them. And as always, please send me any questions you might have if you think of some after the webinar, and I'd be more than happy to relay them to Dimple and Livia. Thanks so much for joining us for CSUN Learning Event number 43 on adaptive policies and indicators. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and until next time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.